I'm calling it now. This was a freaking masterstroke of marketing.
Back in my day, that was called YOLO.
Anything that proves that it's going to take us longer for this thing to take over and become the engineering singularity.
You're either going to arrive at your destination or you're going to crash into a wall, which for poor Leo seemed like he crashed into a wall.
Vibe coding a whole application that's going to live and scale at this point. Yeah, I don't think we're there.
Hey folks, welcome back to the API and Anchor. It's another week, and yet again we're here sitting in our little virtual pub to have a conversation about all of the wonderful things that have been taking place in the world of technology, APIs, and all of the things that surround it. Of course, I'm Martin, and I'm joined by Josh. Hello, Josh.
Hey, Martin. Cheers, mate. How's it going?
Cheers, they're all good, thank you. We are going to be talking about something that I'm pretty sure everyone who has just started to watch this video has seen throughout their social feeds, all across LinkedIn and all across the internet this week. It is, of course, vibe coding. Yes, you've probably watched 10 videos about this already, and I promise you it is probably the only time that we're going to talk about it, but it's been so dominant for me, right? In my feeds, all of the feeds, the X, the Blue Sky, the LinkedIn, direct to my brain. That's just what I've seen people talking about. If it's not been model context protocol, it's been vibe coding. It's been
Most
vibe
notably,
coding.
you've given in and you've called it X now. Do you call them Zeets as well?
No, I don't go that far.
Okay.
I would never go all the way in
I hold
on
no
that.
opinion or judgment in this case. It's an apolitical show, so
Yeah,
whatever. Just a lot of people still call it Twitter. That's all.
that's it. That's it. It's I am barely there, but my feed is still is still just purely vibes. That's all it is.
Okay.
That's all it is. So, wanted to talk about this because it is everywhere, and it's something that I was prompted by a image that I'm going to put on the screen right now, um, of someone who, as far as I can tell, anyway, is a real person by the name of Leo. You no doubt saw this if you were on the internet at all over the last couple of weeks. Who had started out building an application, and it says the SaaS was built with Cursor, zero handwritten code, and it was making money. And that was at 4:34 in the morning, and then there's another message slightly later in the day, 9 o'clock at night, that says, guys, I'm under attack. Random things are happening, maxed out usage on API keys, people bypassing the subscription, creating random shit on the DB. And effectively, I'm going to stop sharing what I'm doing publicly on X. There's just some weird people out there. And that kind of started a whole range of wonderful things, including a fantastic Reddit thread, which I'll link in the description below, which is definitely worth a read, about all of the things that can go wrong when it comes to the world of vibe coding. But Josh, do you know what the actual definition of vibe coding is?
Do you want me to actually I think it was Andre Carpethy coined the
Mm-hmm.
term, right?
Yeah.
Whose videos on AI at the LLMs obviously that must watch 3 hour monsters, but if you're on a flight, watch them. I thought I learned a lot from it. It's coding it's just using the AI, right? You're not writing or looking at the code. You're just kind of it feels like that old. We used to have a similar approach for debugging stuff, right? Where you just like randomly make changes and then test it, and randomly make changes and test it until it worked. It's a
Yeah.
little bit like that, but you're doing it with the AI is randomly making the changes, and then you test it until it works. I think
Yeah.
is that right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And these days, this is called vibe coding, right? Which, not to age myself in any way, but back in my day, that was called YOLO, YOLO coding,
Can we make
which
the camera go black and white for that, please?
just the age
With
filter
scratches
just
on the
just
yeah,
just
yeah.
kicks in. Back in day, yeah, vibe coding is what that is today, right? Just using an LLM to generate some kind of an application, build something for you, and then not looking at any of the code that ultimately comes from it. It's the equivalent of like putting AI in the driving seat, effectively, when you as the developer are in the passenger seat attempting to navigate by handing out instructions that may or may not be followed or properly understood, and you're either going to arrive at your destination or you're going to crash into a wall, which for poor Leo seemed like he crashed into a wall a little bit.
So I saw this unfolding. I'm also a user of X Twitter, and I was very suspicious. This guy just seemed so sincere and vulnerable as to not be real to me. So my initial, my initial take was that this was a fake account that was sort of parodying the notion of vibe coding and just obviously unfolding the kind of narrative that everyone was predicting would happen, and did a great job of going viral as a result of it. But it
Yep.
seems like, in general, the consensus is people believe this. People believe it was real. I thought it was like I think you were saying before, it was some kind of marketing stunt, right? But because where did it end up?
Well, after the thread continues, it ultimately ends up with him deciding to bin off the app completely and then rebuild it using a service called Bubble, which he then points to, and I'll pull Bubble up right now. It points to it being like more secure by default and having more guardrails in place. And when I read that, I was like,
I'm calling it now.
that's
This was a
genius
freaking
marketing.
masterstroke of marketing. Bravo, Bubble. Well done, you.
Absolutely. And I mean, you know what? If that is true, superb. Well done. And
I'm gonna go and look up the CMO of Bubble and try and hire them right now.
and all power to them for managing to do that. But I mean, everybody jumped on it because they wanted to jump on it, right? People have been waiting for these kind of fails to appear so that they could be like, yes, I told you so, and this is why everything is bad about this. Because people
Because they're all terrified, Martin. They're all,
are they
these
though?
whole
Because
engineers terrified they're going to lose their jobs, and so that any idea that that this coming wave of AI replacing developers, it does seem like people like to celebrate its downfall, like to celebrate its weaknesses. I mean, it's definitely something I've noticed that the engineering community get really excited about anything that proves that it's going to take us longer for this thing to take over and become the engineering singularity.
yeah, absolutely. I found that actually the folks on Reddit are nicer about the general idea of vibe coding. There's a fantastic thread that I'm going to link to as well. That is effectively a list of advice for people who are going to go down the route of vibe coding, and like things you should be aware of, things you should think about, sources and various other stuff that you should use to not end up in the same situation as, let's do this, Leo. Because ultimately that's is what's going to happen, right? A lot of people who are vibe coding, and let's be clear, right? Vibe coding isn't like being a developer and using an LLM to assist you in what it is that you're doing, right? Because you're looking at the code and that's kind of helping you fix some problems and refactoring stuff for you. That is not vibe coding. You can have vibes while you do that, but that's not necessarily vibe coding. If you're down that rabbit hole of vibe coding, and a lot of people who do go down that route, they're not necessarily technical, they're not engineers, they haven't got a background in building applications, and they don't know what they don't know. So it's obvious to me like why these things come up. And it's nice to see actually people pulling together, engineers pulling together and be like, this is how I would do it, or this is how I am doing it, and this is the best practices that I'm following in order to manage to get something out of this. But a lot of people, and I think even Andre Karpathy says, it's like it feels right now like this is still kind of limited to a cool weekend project or a POC of some kind, which feels kind of correct from my experience anyway. Have you vibe coded, Josh?
Yeah, of course. It tends to be something I do at the weekend, like you describe,
Yeah.
on like little things. I have also, I've actually written code. I don't know if it's made it into production, where I've not deeply looked at the code that was generated, but I've written really solid tests, etc. for it. It's tiny little components that there's not a lot of code in it. I don't. I feel it's very testable. It's isolated. It's not got a lot of dependencies. On that sort of thing, I guess it's not quite vibe coding, but I've been more trusting. As long as I've got a great set of tests as well to go with it and make sure that it's doing what I expect it to do. This is usually things like weird string manipulation algorithms and so on that are real hard to read anyway.
Yeah, but the thing is, like, to write tests, right? So like that's how you're going to back up, right? That's going to be your safety net. Your guardrails are there because you understand that there is a way to keep what you're doing tight enough that you could take what you've done and, get it all the way through to production. And that's where, it's not hard to have an LLM write tests. In fact, sometimes it's pretty good at it, especially
Yeah,
if
yeah,
you don't want to do it.
yeah.
But that's where a lot of people who are going to go down the route of just vibe coding an application aren't even going to get to that point. And it's not something that is necessarily built into a lot of the platforms. Like vibe testing is not a thing so far. Anyway, there are aspects of what the platforms have in terms of testing, but if you're inside something like Cursor, unless you tell it that you're going to want tests for all of the things that it does, it's not going to do that. And it's just going to go ahead and build an application. It's going to do it pretty well, but there's not going to be any backing to that at all. There are no guardrails at all. So if you don't know what your protections need to be, you ain't going to have them.
Yeah, I mean, in my mind, the more LLMs struggle with this more and are going to make mistakes or create problems for any engineer, and then obviously the better their engineer, the earlier they're going to recognize the problem versus the more nascent engineers. It's obviously around sort of the complexity of the system. I mentioned not having dependencies, how much code, how many layers, and so when you say vibe coding an application is quite a different thing from vibe coding a tiny function. And that's where it gets hard. I think probably a really good position for people to be in who are doing this kind of thing right now is if you ever worked in a testing role and have a great testing mind, like you just know how to think about systems breaking. If you've worked in product as a product manager, you know how to articulate your requirements in English for what you want to get out of it. So people who've lived at the nexus of those roles are probably in a fantastic place to get the most out of AI, in my opinion. But yeah, vibe coding a whole application that's gonna live and scale at this point. Yeah, I don't think we're there. But I do think folks who are riding this approach off, whether we'll be calling it vibe coding, it reminds me a little bit of people saying, in the early days of the internet, that the internet will never be fast enough for video. Like, I mean, I actually I saw a post today from Mark O'Neill at Gartner, which I thought was quite a good way of putting it. Is that we've continuously shifted up in abstraction building software. From writing machine code to higher and higher level languages that are taking us further and further away from the sort of the machine code and the implementation. Vibe coding is an evolution of that, a massive leap, admittedly, a massive leap. It's a huge step, but it's the same idea in a way. You're just one layer further away from the compiler, right? Or the compiler just got a lot bigger, as another way of thinking. I think that this path we'll be going down. It'll get better.
Yeah. For me, it feels like this is the new low-no code for the less technical users, right? That are jumping on this. There was a few years ago, low-no code services were kind of all over the place. There was, a few more popping up, every year. It feels like that's been very much now completely absorbed, with the exception of major players like Zapier or Make, and to a degree NAN. Although they have just announced like a massive, like almost $60 million round of funding to push them very much into the AI workflow space. So, not really so low no code anymore, and very much AI. But I mean, I remember like 9 years ago, I ran a startup accelerator in London, and part of the sessions that I taught on that was one about how to kind of rapidly prototype and figure out product market fit using low no code tooling. And I think about that now, and I absolutely would have completely flipped it. If it was today, it would be how to effectively vibe code that stuff so you can get it out the door, so you can get it in front of people, so you can get that
Prototype.
feedback, and you can start that iteration lifecycle really, really quickly. And I think about how fast those teams would manage to get stuff done now. Like the first week would be so exciting just because of the concept of vibe coding and the tooling that's available, compared to then when it was like finding the tool, figuring out how to use it, figuring out which services to plug into it, hoping that the one that you wanted to use had an API and an integration in the first place. And, now it's like, almost limitless in that sense. And even with those tools, right? Like with the invention of MCP, chances are there's going to be a server that's going to help to plug in that stuff. Like it really is like, super broad now. So what you could achieve today compared to then so very exciting. In a way, I'd like to get that whole group back together again and just be like, right, 1 week, build all your stuff again, do it
Yeah, and I
completely
think the
use
thing is,
Spark for coding.
yeah, the other, it's getting to a prototype. I think it's always been very valuable. Also, getting to a prototype is a good way of learning how to build a real thing. You learn so much in that early stage, and you might not be learning what the exact code looks like. I don't think that was ever interesting. It was how does the experience come together? How does building a system of components that interact together come together to solve your problems? So I think that's just got a huge accelerated boost with this stuff. So yeah, it's exciting.
Yeah,
I do
absolutely.
think one thing though, I don't know if I agree with I don't know if this is like a hard statement you were making. I think it's going to be super valuable to very highly capable engineers as well. In fact, more so. It's going to be a force multiplier for, very, very strong engineers. Yes, it'll significantly increase the capability of someone who doesn't know engineering very well or is new. But I think the folks who are going to benefit from it most are the people who master it, but have a really good systems mind, systems understanding, and can, when they need to, drop into the lower level.
Yeah, oh no, absolutely. I was very much just saying, the two ends of the spectrum, right? Value at both ends for those people. But you know, like if you really understand like application architecture, right? This is also a super fun thing to go down the route of doing, because you really start to learn the limitations of what an LLM can and can't
Yeah.
do. And that's really valuable knowledge now, right? To take into anything that you're doing, any engineering role that you're doing, understanding where the limitations lie and how much you're going to be able to use it, or your team is going to be able to use it to achieve certain things is a key, I think, to understanding like what's your new, AI powered velocity as a team going to be, right? Compared to what it would be without it. And without knowing where those limitations are, you could never know that. And
Yeah.
it's so it's very valuable. Absolutely, I definitely wasn't discounting that. It's just it opens up doors for people who have never touched anything like this before, in ways that we haven't really had up until very recently, and as well as it does for everyone right up to the scale of the most senior engineers you can imagine.
Yep. Yeah. Agreed.
So I'm curious, right? We've built stuff before. You have built many things. A lot of the things that people are vibe coding are ultimately going to have some kind of an API inside of them. Information needs to get from the front to the back. Chances are that there's something in the middle of that that's something like an application programming interface. Based off of that, what knowledge would you share with people who were going down the route of, say, I'm going to vibe code something to consider, to ensure that they don't fall down down the same path as poor Leo with his woes? What would you say to them?
If we analyze what kind of went wrong for this person is, he built an app. Oh, this bubble employee, he built an app that worked functionally but didn't have any non-functioning requirements by the sounds of it. Like didn't have authentication, didn't have any security in place. So I think that's one significant mistake. And so how to fix that, though, I think looking at the Reddit threads you shared and looking at the best practices there, I assume I have not actually had a chance to look at these threads. I actually have a block on my phone that won't let me get to Reddit unless I wait 30 seconds to try and keep me productive. Same on Twitter and on Instagram and that kind of thing. So I didn't get to open it up when I was reading your notes. Yeah, so those are big things. Like how encourage them to think about the non-functional requirements of their apps, and encourage them to tell their LLM to think about this and review their code for that. Using any kind of governance tooling you can to help with that. I guess there's a little element of, what do you do about making yourself a target? Because, there's this great thing about like building in public today, which is so popular. But in this case, this person did so on a topic which people seem to want to ridicule and seem to want to attack.
Yep.
Did he make himself a target? Would he have got winning customers without it? I don't know how to think about that, and what to recommend there, other than be careful, folks. There's a lot of... What was the phrase at the end of the tweet? Weird people out there. There's some weird people.
There's a lot of weird people out there. Yeah.
There is a lot of weird people out there, is my advice.
Yeah, there are.
What you got? What are you thinking?
I mean, look, you look at that, it's whether it was, for marketing purposes or not, right? Like there's a laundry list of stuff there of things that can go wrong, and it's based off of a lack of awareness about some of the aspects that you need to know about when you take an app public, right? So, consideration of security and how passwords and personal information or API keys get handled, right? Have they been exposed in an easily discoverable way, right? Are you not using environment variables ultimately, and this is all stuff that you can quite easily write prompts around if you know that you should. And that's really where I think it falls down. I would advise anyone going down the route of thinking about straight up vibe coding something to focus on security as your top priority, and go and find some prompts that you can use to help you with this, or just focus in on a little bit of investigation around you know figuring out how you should effectively manage passwords, how you should effectively manage personal information, especially if there's some kind of like regulatory stuff in there, right? That could really
Mm,
bite you
oh
ultimately.
man.
um, API keys, how should these be handled? If you're using cloud hosting, or you're plugging into APIs that are like paid for and are measured in like a metered sense or volumetrically, set billing limits. Like, don't end up, as many people have, and I've seen this on the internet over the past couple of weeks as well, folks lamenting, like accidentally hitting like the Google Translate API like 50 million times, and ultimately getting hit with a six-figure bill for it, only
Yikes.
to try to have to get themselves out of that situation, right? It's, again, you can block this stuff by setting billing limits on most platforms, so think about doing that. And don't try to build everything yourself. I think is one of the things, right? Like the idea of building your own user management system, authentication, all of this stuff, like, it's great, you do need it if you want that stuff, but you don't have to build it. And
Mm,
there are plenty of good services out there that you could be using that reduces the attack vector of stuff that can go wrong down
yep.
to, have you exposed the API keys for said service? And if you know to not do that, or you can get it to not do that effectively, then you are in a situation, I think, where you're relatively secure, because you're using a service that's built by people who know what they're doing about that particular space, right? Whether it be using Auth0 or Clark, or in the API space, something like Zuplo, to take away, the need for you to have to build like API rate limiting and API key authentication and all of this other stuff, that if you did it yourself, you're running into the possibility where you're going to create problems. And if you can get away from that, then that is probably the best place to start. But I do understand why people are a little bit reticent about doing that, because I think people do go down the route of building in this manner because they're looking for, a catch-all way of approaching building, and they don't necessarily want to get into having to pay for this service and that service and this service over here. But if you don't do
Most of
that, one
these,
of the things
most
that can happen is you end up paying in other ways, and that can be very problematic.
yeah, I mean, most of these things have free services that are good for people getting started like this, like Auth0 and Clark, and Zuplo, of course, has a free tier, that are probably good to get you going. I think that's great advice, actually. I guess I wonder if the problem is as much people are trying to do it all in one sort of self-contained, vibe-coded app, or just aren't aware of the other options. Like, it seems like Leo maybe didn't know much about software vulnerabilities and security and guardrails and resource protection and so on. And not surprising if you've no, I had no idea this person's background other than them being a marketing employee at Bubble. Um, so I don't know how much they know about it, but there's a lot to know. People are doing this for years. I do think, again, I'm not one of these people who's like betting against the AI. It's never going to work it out. Like, eventually, it's just going to do this and get it right for you out the gates.
Yeah.
But it's not there yet, as we're seeing. It's not there yet, and it could be a while.
Yeah, not quite, not quite. I mean, ultimately, there's still aspects of garbage in, garbage out here,
Yes.
right? So if your prompts are trash, you're probably not going to get the best, most beautiful, functional, secure application in the world. It's as simple as that, ultimately. But I'd say, if you're building something and you're going to vibe code your personal project or your POC, then that's probably okay. Chances are you're not necessarily going to put that into a position where you're going to talk about it in public and people are going to vehemently try to attack it. But if you are going to take something out into the world and ultimately that requires people to register or give you details or something along that, like, be responsible about it. Just think about the experiences that you've been through when you've signed up for something online, right? Like, that's something that even people who have never touched a third party API or built an application using code before have all been through. It's just takes a minute to think about like how other people have approached it and think about doing it in a similar manner.
Makes sense. Makes sense. I love it. Cool. I'm glad we worked Zooplot in there, so you can use that for API keys, sort out all your API key authentication worries and rate limiting, and so that you can protect your resources from getting abused by a single API key. So yeah, you should use that. That's one takeaway.
Absolutely. And also, if you are, ultimately getting, more successful with your vibe coded application, we've actually just made 1 million requests available for free on the free plan as well. So that's 10 times more than you could do before. So why don't you go and vibe code that? Vibe to great. That's
exactly. And if you're using
integrate.
the paid tier, I think it's 20 times cheaper than it was before to do custom domain with 1 million API requests. So bargain, practically,
Absolute bargain.
Bargain.
Fantastic. Well, look, Josh, thank you very much for sitting down and talking with me about this, of course. Thank you very much for watching this. And if you've got any thoughts or opinions, we would love to hear them. Obviously, this is a topic that generates plenty of interest and I'm sure plenty of feedback. So drop a comment below or do it on LinkedIn. We would love to read and we'd love to engage with it. Thank you very much for being here and we will see you next time.
Vibes out.